You can count when you're happy. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can count when you're sad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or count when you're frightened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Count when you're mad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Counting is wonderful. Counting is marvelous. Counting's terrific and how.
Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and it's time to count things. Things that seem to crop up a lot in Smallville. Episode by episode, we'll rack up a running tally of the stuff that seems to happen over and over again, and I'll point out the things I think really work, really don't work, and the things that make me want to swallow a kryptonite key or stab myself in the heart with a kryptonite knife. Naturally, we're going to start my pilot off with The Pilot, or Pilot, as it's so aptly titled. And as there's a lot to cover in this first episode, this is likely to be on the longer side of the running time the show is likely to run in general. I'm pulling no punches and taking no prisoners because, understand, I have an extremely love-hate relationship with this show. When I love it, I really love it. And when I hate it, well, you'll see. In 1989, a meteor shower of rock from a bright green glowing dead planet rains down on one tiny Midwestern town of 25,001 people. Or at least, it's tiny if you're making a television show in Vancouver and you've never been to a tiny Midwestern town in America. It's terrible in the short term as it blows up everything and kills anyone standing around looking up at the meteors as they fly straight at them. And I'm really sorry for laughing at your parents' deaths, Lana. Really, I feel terrible about it. Maybe I just saw it from the wrong angle. Man, I'm a horrible human being. But in the long term, it's great for the town as it doubles the population and brings evil, stereotypical big money industry to employ everyone. The meteor shower brings with it a mysterious spaceship shaped like a sandwich, but it's not sandwich delivery, it's baby delivery, which is really convenient as that's just what Martha wished for at the flower shop. What service? The Kents raised the alien child as their own, and in 2001, we find Clark Kent is a freshman in high school, though he and all his friends look like freshmen in college. He has superpowers, and he's trying to fit in without being a, quote, total loser. He wants to join the football team, but his dad won't let him for fear that he'll break all the kids on the field. His parents raise him with integrity and hometown values, so when he saves Lex Luthor from one of the first of Smallville's many car crashes, and Lex tries to give him a truck as a gift, because giving someone a motor vehicle after a nearly fatal car crash isn't ironic at all, his father won't go for it. The Luthors, after all, have bought out a lot of Smallville's businesses from under the legitimate and respected owners, and Jonathan says, "I want you to know where the money came from that bought that truck." He gives it back to Lex, who seems overly concerned with making Clark his very best friend. Meanwhile, Clark is a little more than obsessed with Lana Lang, who wears a necklace made of the meteor rock that killed her parents, which is only one of the many things that are supposed to be sentimental and charming but come off as slightly creepy to me. She's a walking cliche, as she is the star cheerleader and she's dating the star football player, and they even become prom queen and king, thus beginning Smallville's long-running trend of drawn-out love triangles. Winnie doesn't like how Clark looks at her, so he strings him up in the football field in the juvenile scarecrow tradition, which just happens to have years ago produced our first Kryptofreak, Jeremy Creek, who was strung up in the field himself when the meteor shower hit in '89, and now somehow has amazing lightning powers. He's back to get revenge on the students who did that to him, and to the entire student body, apparently for going to that school. Clark blames himself for Jeremy and for Lana losing her parents, and gets really broody. He stops Jeremy from killing everyone, daydreams about dancing with Lana, and then credits. Smallville starts off as a really fresh reimagining of Superman. It feels very much like a family drama about family issues, from the two perspectives of small-town, modest family, and big-city, rich family, the Kents and the Luthors, respectively. It has supernatural elements, but the Superman lore is largely in the background. This is a side of Superman we've rarely seen before. The shy high school kid trying to find his place and building the character that will eventually make him into the Man of Steel, and there does seem to be some real potential here. Lex is immediately mysterious and fascinating. His confidence and arrogance is infectious. You can tell from the beginning that there's a part of Clark that wants to be this guy, and who wouldn't? He's instantly complex, with a clear model of the man he'll someday become, but wants to fight against being. Lionel Luthor only appears in the opening flashback, but in John Glover's short performance, we can see the comic book Lex Luthor. Giving Lex a father to battle in this incarnation is smart, because if Lex is to be one of our protagonists rather than the villain of the whole show, he can't have killed killed his parents in a tenement fire. Making the Kents a younger couple is smart. The high school kids watching the show can relate better to parents their own parents' age, and they still embody all the traditional values and character traits of the original Kents. Snyder and O'Toole are by far my favorite casting choices and my favorite versions of these characters. I love Clark and Jonathan's exchanges almost as much as I like his and Lex's. These two men feel like father and son. Clark has a deep respect for his father, and Jonathan has sage advice, and Jonathan's immediately likable because he has to figure out how to let his son be a regular high school kid while dealing with his superpowers. The idea that Jonathan has a lot to do with why Clark becomes Superman really comes out here. Clark: Dad, I saved the guy's life. Jonathan: so you think you deserve a prize? And the way Lex and Clark meet is inspired, Clark realizing he can do more with his powers than win football games, and I like the irony of his first big save being Lex Luthor, who will, of course, inevitably become his greatest enemy. I like the idea of Chloe. She's, of course, very Lois Lane-esque. That's on purpose, and it makes sense to plant the reporter seed early. Finally, the Kryptofreak formula is contrived, sure, but the idea of kryptonite giving people powers has some potential. It keeps Clark from being too physically strong, although that becomes problematic later, and gives him some bad guys to fight, which a lot of viewers probably want. Jeremy and Clark have a plight in common. They both were strung up as the Scarecrow, and each chooses a different path. Jeremy decides to get revenge, and Clark decides to, well, get back at Whitney with a practical joke, but he at least doesn't use his powers to kill anyone. Clark blames himself for everyone's problems just because he was born and somebody sent him to Earth. Clark seems to be only enamored with Lana because he thinks she's hot, she's a cheerleader, and he's been looking at her through a telescope for years. As the series progresses, she's gonna be stalked by a bunch of superpowered guys who are all after her because, well, she's apparently hot, and the question is going to come up over and over in my mind. Clark's checking her out every day through his telescope. He's got superpowers. So what's the difference between him and the Kryptofreaks? They're meteor-infected, so they're evil, but Clark's Kryptonian, so he's not? We'll see later in the season that not all meteor-infected people go homicidal or go crazy. So it really seems like the only reason this behavior isn't creepy for Clark is that, you know, he's the good guy. The script says so. If his interest in her was less shallow, maybe it wouldn't be so bad, but as it is, it really hampers his likability as a protagonist, high school kid or not. Lana is incredibly shallow. She obviously likes Clark more than Whitney, but she only seems to stay with him because he's on the football team. Clark and Lana are both orphans, and that draws them together, but neither really acknowledges that. She looks at the camera like she's all mysterious and complicated, and she's just another 9th grader. Look, dating in 9th grade just isn't that big of a deal. You don't like the stupid quarterback? Dump him. Clark and Lana's really touching scene together is made less so by the fact that they're both making up personalities for her dead parents. Each of them in the graveyard claim her parents are telling them things, and it comes off as a little awkward. I'll admit, they have some potential chemistry, if only they'd start having some conversations about specific things and not so abstract. But acting like your dead parents are joking about homosexuality is just weird. And where is all that smoke coming from? I know Mark Snow, the composer from X-Files, is working on this show, but did he bring the Cancer Man with him? And now, what were they thinking, or, as I like to call it, questions to ask Jor-El when I get to heaven. Number 1, how is it that Clark has never dealt with a Kryptofreak before this, but he's going to fight one every week now for the next several years? They've been popping up since 1989, and Chloe has a wall of weird, so it isn't that this Jeremy guy is the first one, but he is the first one Clark has ever fought, and he's going to fight one in nearly every episode for the next few seasons after this. Suddenly, out of nowhere, all these Kryptofreaks come out of the school just because, you know, that's when the series started. Compare this to a show with a similar formula, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which Smallville obviously draws heavily from. In that show, there's a clear logical reason to why supernatural stuff starts in the pilot and keeps popping up, the opening of the Hellmouth. And even Buffy's presence at that moment is explained. She's drawn there because she's the Slayer. But these Kryptofreaks are everywhere, so why didn't Clark deal with any in the 8th grade? And I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but why didn't any of them go after Lana in the 8th grade either? Was she not the hottest girl in school until the 9th grade? Number 2, would it really occur to a guy like Whitney to put Lana's necklace on Clark if he didn't know it made him sick? Really? He's gonna risk Lana getting mad at him for losing her necklace, you know, the thing that reminds her of her dead parents, which, of course, happens next episode. Does Lana have superpowers? Apparently, Lana develops her super hearing before Clark does, because after Clark daydreams they dance together at the end, he quietly says in his loft, "Thanks for the dance, Lana," and she turns around at her house across the street like she heard him. Really? And now for the counting. Of course, we have one Kryptofreak, Jeremy Creek, who gets lightning powers, and apparently you get that by being in a cornfield while a meteor shower is happening. It's just that simple. He also doesn't age. That's his other superpower, though he certainly looks like he could be 26 to me. His villain plot is he wants revenge for being strung up and having a pre-iconic symbol painted to his chest. We have two car crashes. Clark's parents at the beginning, and of course when Lex hits Clark, and I'm not counting all those parked cars that blow up at the beginning, or the cars that Clark piles up at the end. We've got two instances of Clark getting affected by green kryptonite. Lana's necklace both times. The first time is just when he walks up to her, and the second time is when Whitney puts the necklace on Clark. And this week we have 7 blatant DC references or references to Superman, Superman foreshadowing. We've got Oliver Queen's father's death mentioned at the beginning, which is pretty cool. Clark reading a story on his computer about the, quote, fastest man alive. Lana asking Clark, what are you, man or Superman? Clark wearing a blanket like a cape after he saves Lex. Clark standing in front of Angel's wings, which is obviously a reference to flying. Lex asking Clark, do you believe a man can fly? And the S on the Scarecrow, which I'm also going to lump together with the Smallville High S. We've got 2 instances of characters walking away from a conversation angry, which is going to happen all the time. Both of them are Clark this time. And the things that they're both with his dad, and the first time he says, all I want to do is go through high school without being a total loser, and the second time is when he says, I'd give anything to be normal. We have our very first Smallville memory wipe, something else we're going to see a whole lot, which happens when Jeremy Creek conveniently loses his memory after being electrocuted, thereby not having to get killed, but still not being able to tell anyone about Clark's powers. We've got our first love triangle starting between Clark, Lana, and Whitney. Yay. We've got our first actor who isn't Rosenbaum playing Lex. We're going to see several of those later on in the series, so I thought I'd throw that in, and that's the 10-year-old who plays him at the beginning. We've got one instance where characters are upside down, when the Kents first find Clark in the cornfield. And finally, we have our very first of many Lana stalkers, and yep, it's Clark spying on Lana with his telescope. I also wanted to mention that toward the end of the episode, Jonathan asks Clark if he's okay, to which Clark responds, ask me again in about 5 years. Well, I've seen season 5, and I gotta say, no, he's not okay in 5 years. And hopefully Jonathan thinks to ask him that before he's killed off in just a little over 5 years. My scores for Smallville would be in comparison to everything else in the series and nothing else, and so I'm gonna give the pilot a 3.5 out of 4. Some episodes outdid it, but very few. I'm Captain Logan, and consider this episode counted.